and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Josh Durrell, CEO of the Wyoming Business Council, and I want to welcome you to another conversation in our Building Wyoming's Future series. These conversations are designed to bring Wyomingites together around some of the most complex and important questions facing our state. It's not to sell a single project and not to oversimplify tough issues, but really what we're trying to do is create a shared understanding and some momentum around what comes next. Today's conversation is about critical minerals and more specifically about what it would take for Wyoming to move beyond extraction and capture more long-term value, opportunity, and resilience here in the state we love. It's not a technical deep dive into any one project, although I will tell you that we do have an esteemed panel, and you don't need a background in mining, chemistry, or energy to follow along. If you care about Wyoming's future, if you care about our economy, and the opportunities that are going to be available to us and the next generation, you're exactly who this conversation is for. Before we get started, we always like to hear from the folks that are out there watching this and paying attention. So we're going to do a quick poll to understand a little bit more about how you feel about Wyoming's economic future and what statement best reflects your view today. So if you could take just a minute, it looks like we've got 120 folks who are in the webinar right now. And so as we race to fill that up, we'll see if we can get everybody to put their vote in. Well, it looks like oh, good, we got 100. We got 100 of the 122, which is about 81%. So I'm going to give everybody 5 more seconds to participate if you want. Otherwise, we will stop that poll and we will take a quick look at the results. It looks like folks by and large think that we're making a little bit of progress, but it's not enough to create long-term opportunity, and we're at risk of falling behind if we don't change course. So those are what I would say are probably the most common, and I think it's important for us to think about that. Before we introduce today's panel, I just want to just take a minute and connect this conversation to the last session that we had in building Wyoming's future, which was focused on nuclear energy. And if I had to boil that conversation down into three key takeaways, it'd be that Wyomingites are more aligned on growth than we often think. What we saw in that session is that many people across Wyoming support thoughtful growth that brings more opportunities to their families, and they want their communities to take more action, more an active role in shaping that economy, not just reacting to change when it shows up. I think that Wyoming's workforce is a real competitive advantage, is also something we took away from that. We heard that Wyoming already has a workforce that has the skills, experience, and work ethic needed for these new industries because of our decades of experience in coal, mining, power generation, and other heavy industrial operations. That translates directly into the new opportunities we're seeing, especially in our last one was about advanced nuclear. And during that conversation, I thought this was really, really cool that BWXT said that we are a well-known secret, which I thought was a really interesting way of calling us out and saying that we're somebody that people can really see a future in outside of us. And I think that what is maybe most interesting to me is that we're going to need to take advantage of that inside of us. And that being that well-known secret's great, but we need to make sure that we understand that the public engagement and a bit of boldness matter. The opportunities like these that we see in front of us with critical minerals and that the folks at BWXT are bringing up to the northeast corner of the state, they don't seize themselves. All of us who are engaged in this webinar and engaged in this process need to make sure that we're willing to act. I don't know if anybody knew this, but at the time of that webinar, we were collecting public comments on the Energy Authority's large energy matching fund proposal that BWXT and the Energy Authority were putting together for Governor Gordon. And we got 260 public comments submitted for that, which is I think an incredible showing of how many people care about that topic. We don't know exactly what Governor Gordon is going to do with that. We should know maybe by the end of this week. But I share all of that because I think today's conversation about critical minerals builds on that same theme, that alignment around growth, confidence in our people, and the importance of engagement as we navigate these complex opportunities. With that in mind, let's bring in all the people who are going to help us explore this opportunity around critical minerals. We're joined today by a group of panelists who look at this topic from a bunch of different angles, and we think that that's important because it turns out that you can't just look at it from one spot and think you know it all. So today with us we have Glenn Morrell from Idaho National Lab, Ken Mushinsky from Rare Element Resources, Grayson Buckingham from DISA Technologies, Tyler Brown from UW's School of Energy Resources, and Sarah Fitzgerald from the Wyoming Business Council. And rather than doing formal introductions, I'm going to ask a couple questions and turn it over to Glenn first. You've spent your career working at the intersection of energy innovation, industry, and collaboration across the public and private sectors. How did that path lead you to the critical minerals conversation in Wyoming, and why does it matter right now?
It's a great question. So yeah, I have spent a long time working in various spaces, long history, just so everybody else. Yeah, I've been at INL for just coming on to 3 years now. Before that, I was the director of the Wyoming Energy Authority for a period. And before that, I had a long career in oil and gas technology development and commercialization, dating back seemingly forever. And working in research and development capacities and technology commercialization capacities. How did I end up working in critical minerals? In many ways, it was forced on me, I guess. By background, I'm a geologist by training. That helps when I understand the systems behind the extractive industries. But as I have progressed through my career and seen the importance of supply chains and technology development overall, the importance of critical minerals and critical materials as perhaps a better, broader topic has become more and more prevalent. And I think part of your question, Josh, relates to why are critical minerals called critical minerals in the first place, right? And it really relates to national security and global competitiveness. And national security is predicated in many cases on the projection of two forms of power, economic power and military power. And both of those systems have very long supply chains, right? And any interruption to that supply chain is going to have a cause the economy or the military industrial complex to have a very bad day. Just recently, just last month actually, copper was added as a critical material, and I'm glad that it was for many reasons. Partly because it makes it easier to explain to people why a critical mineral is critical, because everybody understands what copper is. It is ubiquitous across our entire electrified economy. Right? I'm sitting at my desk here. It's made of wood, but even the controllers on it have copper in it. Just about everything around me, the printers, the screens, my phone, some of the alloys all have copper in them. And so one can easily imagine that if that copper supply chain was interrupted in any significant manner, there's going to be a very, very profound negative flow on effect for the economy overall. So, yeah, how do I find myself here? I live and I work in a energy economy with an electrified economy, and it is impossible to avoid critical minerals and materials. The job itself is all about advancing or changing the world's energy future and securing the infrastructure required to deliver it. And again, critical minerals is a big part of that. I think it is becoming more and more important, really, because of global influence and certain players in an international specter holding this as a bit of a sword over our heads in terms of being able to restrict supply to some of these materials and inflict damage simply by deciding not to sell things to us. And in a national lab setting, that's very much a big part of my job.
Hey, thanks, Glenn. I'm going to turn it over to Ken Mashinsky now from RER. You've been working to advance a rare earth project here in Wyoming for quite a few years now. What originally pulled you into this space, and then kept you committed to building here?
Thanks, Josh. Well, it dates back to my time. I was 33 years at General Atomics in my previous life, and the last, with mining experience, uranium mines around, and even nuclear engineering. But my last third of my career was running the M&A for the company, and Rare Element Resources had some separation technology that uh, piqued our interest, and so we invested in that company. I think back in 2016 or 2017. And as no good deed goes unpunished, you bring a company to the owner of General Atomics. You get made president of the affiliate that ends up owning those shares and get put on the board of the company. But we were interested in the separation technology because, no offense to any miners out there digging, like I always say, digging rocks out of the ground is not nuclear science per se, but separating, specifically in our case, our mine is rare earths, as you said. So specifically neodymium and praseodymium, which is mostly used in magnets and superconducting materials, more and more in quantum computing and those sorts of things. And basically, it's almost as ubiquitous as copper, as Glenn was saying. Every monitor, every computer, every cell phone that has a microphone, a screen, a speaker in it has some sorts of rare earths in them. So the vision at General Atomics at the time was, bring a secure domestic supply chain into the United States so that we wouldn't be subject to all these vulnerabilities in the supply chain that Glenn referenced. So that's how I kind of came to here. We spent millions of dollars between RER and General Atomics over the years. I retired from General Atomics, took a couple of years off. They asked me to come back and be CEO of this company. So, and you're right, we have been spending, and it's not easy. This is science. It's hard. It's hard work. We're getting ready to start up our demonstration plant to demonstrate the commercial viability of our separation technology, and it is important to RER. It's important to our major shareholder, which is an affiliate of General Atomics at this point, and so that's basically the story of how I got here.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And as you mentioned, it's a lot of hard work and a lot of science and a lot of fun there. So speaking of somebody who's doing some pretty cool stuff, Grayson Buckingham with DISA Technologies, you're building a company in this space as a founder. So what motivated you to take that leap, and why Wyoming?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. It's certainly been a fun ride. We actually, our origin story, my co-founder, John Lee, and I did our MBAs together. And, we were fortunate enough to win the Elbogen competition back in 2017. And, we both had full-time jobs, but then we won the Kickstart Challenge, and then we won the Casper Challenge. And we said, we've got some non-dilutive funding here that, maybe we can pair that with our savings. And, we were pretty young and didn't have much money at the time, but decided to pursue what we saw as a massive opportunity. And when we first started the company in 2018, critical minerals was not a term being used. Uranium, which is a major focus of ours, was at $20 a pound. Now it's at 80 and projected to go up even higher to support the nuclear renaissance that's happening in the United States. And we just grinded for the first 3 years, and we didn't take a salary. It was just the two of us, sharing the same desk even. But the support of the Wyoming community was something that was really attractive to John and I. We tracked over the years just people letting us use loaders or office space for free. It's over $1 million, and I don't think you find that in any other state than Wyoming. And as we continue to grind, and hit milestones. Today is awesome. I stepped out of our company summit that we're having. We have over 50 employees, and we have 30 job positionings that we're going to be launching in January to bring on more talent. And the vast majority of those employees are located in Casper, where our headquarters are. Today we've raised just this year alone $60 million in private capital. And, I think it's just a testament to what you're able to accomplish in Wyoming. The oil and gas sector has created an amazing infrastructure that's fungible to services like ours. So, all of our fabrication, assembly, we're able to use different vendors within Wyoming that can do, high quality work and do it effectively. And so, you know, we have no intention of ever leaving Wyoming. I think we're one of the first, outside of what Ken's doing and some other companies, like critical mineral processing and separation technologies. But our hope is that we can create, be this microcosm to create a larger ecosystem here where people look to Wyoming. And I think we've demonstrated that you can raise outside private capital from Silicon Valley to Vancouver and Texas that'll flow into Wyoming. And yeah, just to loop it in, it's been an amazing journey, and so we're continuing to grow and really disrupt a space. So in the mineral processing space, 4% of global electricity is just used to break rocks apart. It's really inefficient, and the technologies have been around since the medieval ages. And so we offer an alternative to those archaic ways of grinding. And now we've got commercial installs from Australia, Canada, the United States. We have units in South America that we're all building right here in Wyoming and shipping out. And then on the uranium side, we're the only EPA validated technology to remediate abandoned uranium mine waste, and we just received the first of a kind license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to be able to go remediate and recycle uranium. And yeah, so we're poised for success. And as I was just telling my team, like that timing is perfect right now because I think the current administration really wants to start onshoring our capabilities to process these critical minerals. We have great geology in the United States. And I think where we can really have an edge as Americans is through the technology side. And so, yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. And to get kind of that high level view of your origin story and the way that it has progressed over the years. I know you feel like it's probably been a blur, but it was probably a lot of stress, a lot of those long nights, a lot of the wondering what to do next. So, thanks for continuing that and really being a great example of what can happen here in Wyoming. So thanks for that. Tyler Brown, I'm going to turn to you. You have a pretty unique perspective being at the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, because I think you're kind of in this spot where research, industry collaboration, and workforce development are all coming together. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this role and then what excites you most about Wyoming's critical mineral work right now.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So, I am the program manager for minerals research here at the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. I originally came to the university as a geology grad student, and I've been here ever since. Before I came to the School of Energy Resources, I was the director of a materials characterization laboratory facility and focused a lot on the chemical and physical characteristics of natural and synthetic materials. During that time, I was lucky enough to collaborate with the School of Energy Resources on some of their very early work on critical minerals research. Additionally, I also had the opportunity to serve as a geology consultant on a few economic reports that were being done for mining operators, both in the state of Wyoming and in the region. So, through that experience, I really started to feel that the university and the state of Wyoming were uniquely positioned to figure out how we could add to and bolster the burgeoning domestic critical mineral supply chains. So, what am I most excited about right now in terms of Wyoming? I think that we have several different types of feedstocks, the upstream resource, and we also, as with two of the panelists here, we have a lot of those midstream processing technologies as well as those upstream resources that are ready to continue to grow those links in the critical mineral supply chain.
Right on. Thanks, Tyler, for that. Now we get to turn to somebody I know pretty darn well. I want to talk a little bit to Sarah Fitzgerald, and you spend a lot of time thinking about the economy in Wyoming as a system. How did you kind of get to this spot where emerging industries like critical minerals are part of the picture?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, Josh. Well, um, And I'll tell you just a little bit about kind of like why I'm interested in Wyoming's economy as a system too. And to do that, I'll tell you a story that happened to me a couple months ago when it was not like windy and like 35 degrees outside, but like less windy maybe, and maybe closer to like 75 outside. Um, my daughter wanted to go over to my mom and dad's neighborhood to ride her bike around because it's hilly in my neighborhood. It's flat over there. So I was like, okay, gave my dad a call and said, hey, we're coming over to ride bikes and just went around the little loop in their neighborhood and we were just catching up and that's something that's something that is really easy to take for granted. But I was reflecting in that moment how lucky I am to just have that like really simple little interaction there because like Tyler, I went to UW and got a degree in geology and it Tyler's lucky in that he got to stay at UW and have that job there, but I moved away like most people do. And so and so when I wanted to move back home, I ended up being able to work in this role where I get to think about how Wyoming's economy works for people who want that experience, who want to be able to take for granted that they can just take their kids and have them hang out with their grandparents, on a random weeknight. Um, and on that random weeknight when we were going around the loop in my mom and dad's neighborhood, though, I was looking at all the houses of the people that I grew up with, and I think I'm one of two or three in their neighborhood that is not really far away from that experience. And it's that experience that really sort of drives me to think about this. Um, when it comes to critical minerals, that's for me. What's bringing me to critical minerals is the enormous opportunity, because critical minerals, as many of our other panelists have talked about, is sort of at this moment in time where the market is changing really rapidly for geopolitical reasons, and that means that there's a really new and emerging opportunity for a lot of different markets. In Wyoming, as many of us mentioned, like as many of you guys mentioned, that we've got great geology, and we've also, what I believe is really important, as Grayson mentioned, we've got the seeds and a couple of like the individuals who are the seeds for this are on this panel today, but we've got the seeds to develop the technology that enables us to not only get the critical minerals out of the rocks in Wyoming, but help other Western countries who see this as a huge opportunity do the same. And in the process, we could potentially create an environment where the jobs that the people who in my neighborhood that I grew up in, they've all left. The critical minerals and this emerging opportunity right now represents an opportunity for us to bring more good jobs to Wyoming. So that's really why I'm interested in critical minerals.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for kind of giving us grounding us a little bit on why this is super important. I think it's really easy when you talk about geology and economics and separating materials and all that to get kind of caught up in that and not always realize why we're doing what we're doing. And I think as you listen to all of our panelists, everybody's got a reason why they're doing what they're doing, and it's not it goes beyond the rocks, and that's one of the things that we really wanted to do with this discussion today. So one of the things I don't think I've ever been on a call with this many geologists, and I guarantee you that generally speaking, there's not a case where 150 people are willing to spend their lunch hour listening to geologists. So what I'm going to tell you guys, I'm going to throw out a really bad dad joke here, but you guys are rock stars, like literally rock stars. when it comes to geology and getting a big crowd of people. Although I will say that now there are fewer people because they're worried I'm going to say more jokes, so I will not. But we are joined by a lot of other people around the state that are part of our team of thousands. And those are community leaders across the state, representatives from Wyoming's energy and natural resources, colleagues from state agencies, partners from the University of Wyoming, and members of the media and members of the public who are really interested in the future of Wyoming. And that participation matters because what we're seeing consistently is a strong statewide interest in this topic for sure, and a shared commitment to building Wyoming's future together. The questions that many of those folks have already submitted in advance reflect that, and we're going to try to get to some of those today. But I also want to take a moment to just recognize a recent milestone that connects us directly to today's conversation. This was in the news that last week, University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, Tyler, props to you, and Wyoming Rare, which is in USA here, announced they secured a competitive seed translation acceleration of research, or STAR award, through the National Science Foundation. That funding is going to help support the assessment of rare earth element byproducts from the Halleck Creek project in the central Laramie Mountains. And it's a really concrete example of how research and industry and investment can kind of come together in Wyoming to move closer to real world application. And again, I think as you listen to these folks' introductions, you see that is really not just potential, but it's happening. And I think that sets a good stage for the conversation we're about to have, where we want to fit in the value chain in a big way and not just be in a spot where people come and take it out of the ground and take it somewhere else. So I'm gonna do this if everybody's okay with that. I might now take just a minute to have maybe Glenn and then Ken and then Tyler talk a little bit about this particular question. So Glenn, from a national and industry engagement perspective, you talked a little bit about this, but can you kind of focus in and put a real fine point on critical minerals, why they've moved so quickly to this, like the center of the public sphere? I mean, people are talking about critical minerals that you would have never expected it. Why has that become such an important topic right now?
Yeah, so it's as I mentioned earlier, it's national security related, right? And we've seen a few of these issues coming for quite some time, actually, maybe 5 years back even. The recognition that processing of critical minerals is dominated by China, essentially. And the reason they dominate it is not because they have any fancy technology that is better than anything else exists. Grace had alluded to things like coming out of the medieval ages, parts of it. The only reason they can dominate is because that traditional processes, there are labor costs which are very, very low in China, and there's essentially a lack of an environmental constraint cost in China. In contrast, America has higher labor costs and higher environmental compliance costs, and that means it's very difficult for us to compete. So China dominates supply, and we saw this coming recently, and just Ken and Grace could probably correct me on this one, but I think it was like in around October, they finally were quite open that they were pulling the trigger in terms of restricting access to some of those critical materials to our supply chain as a pushback to the tariffs and other things that have been imposed by the current administration. And that was a very big trigger to pull because the importance of those materials to the overall economic health and military strength that we have. So, but that's really just a recent manifestation. We've seen the aspects of those supply constraints and the risk associated with those supply constraints for quite some time, and it has been building in terms of trying to address it over probably the last 5 years. Another good example, I mentioned copper being added to the list. I think it was only like 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, that list was only like 16 minerals. And in the last 3 years, it has exploded, right? As the federal government and others have recognized the criticality of various supply chain aspects and how it's moved through. So it has just become more prevalent in terms of the importance, the understanding of the critical materials to the overall economy, the need to do something about it, and the approach as well. Um, it's really technical. If it is simply a cost problem, then the only solution really is to come up with a new technology. That Ken and Grayson are doing incredible work in that space that reduces the cost of processing such that we can compete with these players in a level playing field. It's still going to be challenging because another aspect of China is that they don't necessarily care about the free market, right? So they can recognize the strategic nature of those materials and simply um, act monopolistically and just crash the price if necessary. But by building a larger international environment, which wants to play by the same rules and respects that, then we can hopefully have a strategic position that protects the overall economy and national security of the United States and our allies. And I'll pass it over to my colleagues to add on nuance there.
Yeah, Ken, I might sort of have you give sort of that industry side and what is that urgency that I think Glenn laid out really well. There's a recognition that it's a problem and then there's an urgency around it. What does that look like from the industry's perspective on the ground? Oh, Ken, you might be muted.
Sorry, we do have a lot of both federal and state support, and there's been obviously an upswelling of that, and that could be new NEPA regulations when it comes to permitting mines. It could be we have, as you're probably aware, we have a cost share to build our plant, that participation from the Department of Energy. We got some money from the Wyoming Energy Authority, and that obviously illustrates the urgency of making this business or this industry a go. It's, I don't think, everybody says China, 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 and they have overtaken the market, but a lot of that is because we were asleep at the wheel. We got all comfortable and well, we'll just buy it from somewhere where it's cheaper, and kind of ignored for years and years and years, starting back in the 60s and 70s, even that this was important, that there could be we weren't all just necessarily buddies when it comes to economic competition. And this administration, at least, has really leaned into it and made been very proactive in doing what they can. I believe you see the deals that have gone on with MP Materials and Energy Fuels, and hopefully we'll be able to participate in that. I think Grayson, with his getting that NRC license is not trivial. I mean, that's a big deal. And I believe everybody understands that uranium was just added to the critical minerals list. I think it was on it at one time, but now it's not. But the idea that the government is created this Fast 41 program, and that's not this administration. That what I have to give credit where credit's due. That was the previous administration that started that process. But it is helpful to get all the agencies together in one room and agree on what this process is going to be, agree on what the timeline is, and have an agency that will report have a facility to report these agencies to Congress if they're not performing as scheduled. So it takes a lot of the uncertainty out of the process, and that's been very, very helpful from a industry perspective when you're trying to start up and develop new technologies like we are trying to do.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, hey, I'm going to turn to Tyler now, real quick, and talk a little bit about universities and that whole applied research fit and how in this particular situation, how do you move that from awareness to actual capabilities? And I think, both Glenn and Ken kind of touched on this idea that we're going to have to move pretty fast. And so how do universities and that applied research community fit into that?
Absolutely. Thank you. So first, in terms of the applied research side, I think Ken and Glenn did an absolutely wonderful job of describing the current state of affairs, the national security and economic well-being of the United States. I also think it's worth emphasizing again that there are currently 60 different mineral materials that are on the critical minerals list. And there is a complex supply chain that corresponds to each of those mineral materials. So fortunately, where we stand, there is not a one size fits all for every single link in the supply chain. Each different mineral material has its own geologic source, has its own line of processing, and has its own end product that goes to feed a specific industry or industrial system that we use in our everyday, whether that's energy, whether that's advanced manufacturing, security, or even technology. I mean, one of my favorite analogies is that we carry around the cell phones in our pockets. There are almost 60 different mineral materials involved in the manufacture of that cell phone, and more than 90% of those are imported into the United States or imported into the folks that make these phones and we use. So because there are so many different mineral materials, because there are so many links in the supply chain, that's where a university is really able to attack some of these very specific focus questions on one type of material, one link in the supply chain. And then it is our job, as you mentioned, not just to spread awareness, but actually make it a capability. It is our job as a university to not only train the next generation of the workers that are going to go into these fields, and into these different aspects of the supply chain, but also to link up with the incredible scientific network that exists at national labs and to collaborate with our industry partners. No one unit, whether that's industry, government, or academia, is able to de-risk all of the issues that we have with these critical mineral supply chains. And really, academia serves as a tool for our partners in industry and our partners at national labs to help focus on very specific problems that may be of interest to them, and also give us feedback for what we need to do in order to train the next generation that will go and work for them.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Tyler. I'm gonna jump around a little bit here. You mentioned something about de-risking, and I know Grayson, as somebody who is a founder of a company, taking some essentially taking some technology and taking it from an idea to commercialization. So can you tell us a little bit about, as a founder, can you tell us a little bit about how the partnerships that you've created and, whether that be with academia, whether it be with industry throughout the state, how have they helped you kind of de-risk and move faster or even survive during those early stages of building a company?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that dovetails well, exactly setting the context with what Ken and Glenn were saying. Ken nailed it. How did we get here? We were asleep at the wheel. We wanted cheaper minerals, and China could do it cheaper. And so, so could Russia and everyone else. And, to Glenn's point, what we're competing against are countries that have no environmental regulations. They're just dumping stuff into the waterways, into the ocean. They're state-owned enterprises. And it is just really tough. But like as Americans, we're innovators, we're entrepreneurs. And I truly believe the best way that we're going to compete with China and Russia and Kazakhstan and others that aren't our best friends is through technology. And for the space that we're in, and President Trump and his administration have really leaned into this. With like you're looking at the Department of War through Defense Production Act, they're going all in on bringing critical minerals. Like that's pretty unprecedented from what we've seen and from prior history. And so you need these public-private partnerships to really like kickstart these ideas because they're very capital intensive. They have very long timelines. And until you really get stability, there's not a lot of private market appetite that's going to take a risk like that. And so, when we approached it, as I kind of gave my backstory, like we had some initial de-risking through the Kickstart Challenge, through, the, Casper Challenge, the Elbogen Award, and that allowed us to show that we had something, right? And so you look at it's called technology readiness levels. It's 1 through 9. We started off at 1. You can get to a 3 with some public help. Then we used the University of Wyoming. They helped validate our first study to say, hey, these guys are actually like they have something. Their technology works. Idaho National Labs. They did a verification study on us. And so that helps take us, to a TRL 4, TRL 5, and you're getting these external parties, the EPA, NRC, validating what you're doing. And then that really opens up private capital. And then, you start from angel round. Our first round was $1 million. This year was 60 million. So you're moving from angels all the way to private equity. And so each step along the way, you're de-risking that investment to open it up to, bigger and bigger opportunities, until, you're able to sustain yourself. And, now we're at that point where, you know, putting very big units and mines and, like cash flowing in a very nice way. But, it took us 7 years to get there. And we're fast. Like you look at the average, just for example, the average mine in the United States takes at least 14 years to bring online. And so, there's a lot of de-risking that comes from external parties, the public space. And I think, what we've been seeing recently, with all this, federal and state level support, that's a really good signal to the market as well. When we first started, there was like one fund that invested in critical minerals. Now I'm getting emails every day. Everyone is wanting to get into this. And I think a lot of that's coming from signals from the federal and state government saying, we support this, we want this, we need to onshore critical minerals. And that really, I think we're going to see a lot of cool companies be created in, the next 5 to 10 years in this space.
Yeah, I want to like really kind of highlight a few of the things that you just said there about one, signals that are sent and what that means for the industry, for businesses, and really kind of investors that are helping along the way, as well as the role that the different people play or different groups play in this. I mean, you touched on industry, you touched on academia, you touched on the government, you touched on outside investors, you touched on all of these things, and I think sometimes we tend to forget that that complexity that's going on within a company it's really challenging to put it together. And so understanding all of those pieces that you pushed to make happen, as well as some might have happened because of administration changes or world geopolitics, those things are really, really critical. And understanding the complexity of taking an idea, which you did, to something, a company that just got, $60 million of investment this year. I mean, that doesn't happen normally, but a lot of pieces have to fit together. And so the way you were able to describe that complexity is one, it's impressive, but two, I think it just shows to people around the state, it's not a simple equation. It's not a simple of, well, work harder and it'll all work out. There's a lot of pieces that have to happen here. And in the broader context of our economy, I think sometimes people forget about those signals and about how important policy and investments are to making that happen. So what I'm going to do, if y'all are okay with it, is I'm going to switch over to Sarah and talk a little bit more about the Wyoming economy more broadly and how, we've been an energy state for a long, long time. We're going to continue to be one. I think a really powerful one in the US, but we're also sort of recognizing that we face some pretty big long-term economic challenges. And I would love for Sarah to talk a little bit about what that decline looks like, who it impacts most, and how an industry like critical minerals could maybe turn that around.
Sure, Josh, I'd be happy to. Well, maybe not happy to, because this is the part of the webinar where we talk about all the bad news. But um, Wyoming's economy is in decline. And that's going back to my introduction, the reason why all my friends had to move away is because Wyoming's economy is in decline. You see that in all of our economic indicators. When you look at top line GDP, when you look at employment, that's stagnant to shrinking. When you look at median wages, that is shrinking in a really big way. We're fifth worst in the country in terms of median wage decline. And so when you look at our economy and you look at sort of like the things that tell us about our economy, it's not a pretty picture. We are in long-term decline. Really the reason why that is happening is because we're small. We're actually not alone in this challenge, although we do have some of the worst indicators in the country. We're not alone. This is a problem that affects all of rural America. We start out with this problem that we just don't have enough people. We don't have enough workers in Wyoming. And so what that means for businesses is they can't grow. They can't, it's difficult to locate in Wyoming. It's difficult to start something in Wyoming. Um, and then what that leads to is then we have fewer jobs being created by businesses in Wyoming, and that means more people have to move away. And so you get caught in this huge vicious cycle that's been going on for decades. And it's enormous, you know. And so when we look at little wins, which seem really big, but wins that happen in terms of job growth in individual companies, in terms of company growth, they're really limited by this big effect, and they're kind of like swallowed up by that. So when somebody says, "Okay, I'm going to force this because I love Wyoming and I'm going to start my company here," it's really, really difficult. It's way harder for them to do that here than it is in, on the Front Range in Colorado, for example. And so what's needed in Wyoming to get past that and to really make any one of these individual things work in Wyoming is something a little bit more transformational. We need bigger pushes to push harder against that large vicious cycle. So it can't be kind of like one-offs. It needs to be more industrial scale. We need to catalyze things that change that cycle and reverse it so that we have more companies bringing in more jobs for people rather than the other way around. And what that so that's really kind of like what the problem that we're facing right now. Critical minerals, as I said before, I think represents an opportunity to build something in Wyoming that doesn't exist anywhere yet. We're at this point in critical minerals where it's emerging. We've been at this point in other places in Wyoming before, or in other industries in Wyoming when it comes to coal, oil, gas. There were moments there through history where we said, okay, this is going to be great for Wyoming, and that those have turned out great for Wyoming. What's different this time is that we know that we can benefit from the extraction of critical minerals in Wyoming. We also know that the market hasn't been captured for technology development and downstream applications for critical minerals. And that's an enormous and growing global market that Wyoming has the opportunity to address. And that's the type of thing, if we can build that here instead of in, Oklahoma City or Houston, where those other pieces of those other industries have gone, then that could be the thing that reverses that vicious cycle that I'm talking about.
And those are long-term, high-paying jobs as well. That all flows in the economy, and I think that's critical. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And so, if we take a look at what everybody just talked about, we've got this economic challenge that we're facing. We've got an opportunity that's in front of us that is not a simple opportunity. This is a very complex opportunity where there are a lot of different groups that have got to work well together. But that opportunity that we have here to not just extract and export, but instead understand the value chain, develop the technology around it, be the leaders that we have already started to see we can be, there's a really big opportunity here. And I think that you all highlighted that. What I'd like to do right now is turn it over to the audience though, and try to understand what they think might be the way we can benefit the most from the critical minerals that we have in the state and that are all over the world, and really kind of see what their feelings are. So we're gonna launch a poll here. It's not a quiz. There are no right answers. So answer honestly for what you think is going on and around critical minerals and how you think it might impact us. Let's see if we can race the last poll we did and get to 100 even faster. Okay, we're almost to 100. You can do it. We've got about 94. Let's see if we can get to 120. I think you can do it. If you get a chance, take this poll. Um, All right, we're at 100, so I'll keep talking, but if you're still working on the poll, go for it. I think this information is really critical to just understand how we feel about it. And not surprisingly, it's kind of split. It's kind of almost even, a third, a third, a third. A third think extracting and selling to the US and other Western countries. About a third are saying developing tech and exporting that to Western countries who are working to develop and support their own supply chains, and then developing, refining, and processing capabilities. And we didn't say all of the above because I'm pretty sure we just did that. But I think that there's probably a play for us in all of these areas, and I think that it's critical that we think about it that way. As Grayson mentioned, these are fantastic jobs all along the supply chain, and I don't know, Chris, if we want to share that or if we want to go ahead and shut that down, we can. But you know, these are all areas that we're exploring. And I think that we shouldn't leave any stone unturned when it comes to looking at the market and looking at where we can play. I do, however, want us to sort of open our mind to the idea that what has worked for us in the past in other areas, things that we pull out of the ground and ship somewhere else, or even when we pull it out of the ground and turn it into an electron and ship that somewhere else, that's something that's very comfortable to us. It's something that we understand. It's something that fits our fiscal system, all of those things. The systems that we rely upon are built around those models. But I want us to think a little bit bigger. I want us to think a little bit bolder. I want us to think about a future where we can have a bigger pie, not just a bigger slice of the pie. And I think that that's something that middle idea, that idea of developing technologies that we can export and understanding and owning that intellectual property is really something that I think Wyoming can lean into. And I think it's probably something that's going to separate us as folks mentioned earlier from the countries that we compete with, is that technology and understanding how we can benefit the most from it. So I'm gonna jump in real quick, just a little bit about, you know, kind of like you mentioned that you know, Ken was talking earlier about and Glenn about China and their dominance, but I want to kind of like talk about it maybe more specifically in the US a little bit. And if we're talking about bringing this type of stuff home and bringing it to Wyoming, are we in a position of leadership? Are we lagging? Are we positioned well for the future? Or, you know, what do we need to do to get a lead and then keep it, Ken?
Well, thanks. And just because this is a business council, and we are talking about jobs, I think it's important to note that we're not just creating these engineering jobs. This, like any other industry, if we can set this industry going, it flows down, all the way down to the service industry. When you're building something, you're buying raw materials, you're buying equipment, so it's not just growing this separation technology. In my case, you're servicing your entire community. And it's not just only these highly technical jobs, which are obviously very important. And the Governor Gordon and my representative, Representative Nyman, and Senator Driscoll are all, every time they come to visit the tour, what can we do? What can we do to help? So I think the ultimate goal for RER is to have a complete supply chain of anything that has to do with the rare earths in the state of Wyoming. That is our long-term goal. I would say Wyoming is there from a resource basis, but clearly, I think, as everybody has already said on this conversation, that nobody, we're not quite there on the downstream side of that, which is what we're trying to do. We'll have invested over $70 million in this demonstration plant. We will have 30 odd people operating at 24 hours a day here in 2026, and to prove that we can build a full commercial scale that would employ hundreds of people. So I think Wyoming is making great strides. The regulatory environment is very pro business. The legislature is very pro business, but I do believe Wyoming has some catching up to do. There are issues like Sarah was saying with labor force and that sort of thing, and that's certainly an issue I deal with when you're out in these rural communities. But it's growing. I think it's getting popular. These are well-paying jobs, and I think as we to use the baseball term, you build it, they will come, so to speak. And that's certainly what we're hopeful for.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And we're coming up on the hour, and it's clear we're gonna have to have another webinar on this because this has been one. I think we've gotten a lot out of it, but I think we're also we want to give the audience a shot at asking some questions too. So if I might, Grayson, you mentioned that you're like it, you mentioned that you've built a company from scratch and you're doing this in the state, and you've had all these things that have kind of helped you along the way and gotten you to a spot where you're in a good position now. But if Wyoming wanted to attract 50 more companies that were in this space, what do you think some of the specific ingredients need to be so that Wyoming is the place that this all happens?
Yeah, I think it's going back to what I was talking about, different signals. Like I was remiss in not including the Wyoming Energy Authority. They made an $8.5 million investment earlier this year. Immediately right after that, $50 million in capital. Like boom, that's a great signal, right? People say, okay, wow, your state's backing you. I think Ken definitely makes a very good point in workforce. We're ramping up and trying to hire a lot of folks, and we have a lot of success with University of Wyoming graduates, Casper College graduates that are just coming out of school, where we have a hard time is getting those folks that have 10 plus years experience, that want to come and move to Wyoming, or that have those skill sets within Wyoming. So I think we really need to lean into that and to develop it. And I think we just need to prove that it can be done. Like Ken said, build it and they will come. If Ken's project can really take off and succeed, if what we're doing, we can continue to build and succeed, all those other projects that are focused in critical minerals in the state, people are going to see us as a leader. And I think what we really need to be careful about too is like how the community and the messaging, like how we're messaging that. This is a great opportunity, but if we're shutting down certain projects, I think that sends a very negative signal as well. Like there was a project here in Casper where they decided to move to Tennessee, and it was just because there was a vocal minority that scared it away and made it seem like we weren't open to business. And so I think like as a Wyoming community, people love that, we've got this, spirit of, if you want to go take the risk, like we're not going to stop you as long as, you're not hurting other people. And I think like we need to encourage all different flavors of different business opportunities and newer technologies and projects coming into our state. So.
Yeah. Well, hey, first of all, as someone who's in business, and business can sometimes seem competitive, I just appreciate that you're taking like an abundant mindset perspective on this, because one of the things that we definitely want to do is we want to develop these clusters. We want more people to come around. I think that in every case where you have more businesses working on a similar problem, there is much more growth in that industry, and there's much more strength than there is weakness. And I think that that's something that is not always felt or understood by the general public. And I think it's really important for business owners and people like you to speak up and say, we benefit when there are more companies like us. We benefit when there are greater numbers of employees for us to trade back and forth if that's the case. It's actually a benefit. So I appreciate that mindset, because it actually is really critical for us into the future. You also said something about signals, and I think it's important for us to all remember the signals that we send. And sometimes we think what we're doing is happening in a vacuum, like it's only between me and you, Grayson. We're the only ones talking, or Ken, it's just you and I. Actually, the world is watching what's going on, whether that be around nuclear, whether that be around critical minerals, whether that be around oil and gas, coal, Trona, you name it. The world is watching what we're doing. And those signals are very powerful. Whether we invest in our future or whether we shut it down, the world is watching, and the world, outside world, will not invest in a place that doesn't invest in itself. And I think that's you said it well. The Energy Authority has been a fantastic partner with you, and they have really sent a strong signal that we mean business in Wyoming. And I think we have to make sure that we continue to invest. in ourselves. So thanks for saying that. We're going to turn to some questions really quick here. So let's see. There's a question about regulatory and tax structure. Is our regulatory structure set up to benefit from this type of mineral extraction, or set up to help encourage this type of mineral extraction? And then maybe we'll put that tax structure one off for a second. But tell me about the regulatory environment in Wyoming and how it's positioned to support this industry today. And whoever wants to jump on that one, go for it.
Well, I'll weigh in. We are in the middle. We just started to we're permitting our mine there in northeast Wyoming that will ultimately feed into our separation technology and our commercial separation plant. That's our ultimate goal. On the state level, we have financed. The state has paid for agreement state. Radioactive material possession license, which you have to have because there's, as everybody knows, in just about all the rocks in Wyoming, there is some trace levels of some radionuclides, and so, but RER is financing that arm of the regulatory body, a couple of people, but we are very appreciative of the state of Wyoming funding the agreement state process with the NRC, where you won't have to go to the NRC and get these licenses anymore. You'll work directly with the state regulators, which we obviously appreciate. I would very much like to get Grayson to get his possession license so he cuts my fee in half, but that's a whole nother story. But and then like I mentioned before, the federal government has come up with revised NEPA requirements. I'm not 100% certain I know what they all are at this point, but they are finding cleaner and clearer and faster pathways to get to these minerals that are very important for us to be able to process. So, I think you're a winner at both levels in the current administration. We certainly hope to have our mine permitted by the time this administration is out, because you never know what's right around the corner. So, from a state and a federal level, we're very pleased, and any support that we can get, we very much appreciate.
And just to quickly piggyback off that, Josh, I think that's where Wyoming really has a competitive advantage. When investment banks do their analysis, like Wyoming always ranks in the very, very top of, one of the top investment jurisdictions because of the way our regulators, they're highly credible, they're efficient, they want to work with industry. We look at some other states where we're doing business in, and the state regulators are not easy to work with. They're very tough. So, I think that's Wyoming's got a great, regulatory body to streamline projects in an efficient way that also protects, human health and the environment.
Well, thank you both for laying that out for me. That sounds like a pretty darn good competitive advantage that we will sell the heck out of as we go out there and sell Wyoming. Do you see maybe I could turn this to Glenn for a second. Glenn, do you see what other states, you have a regional perspective on this. Do you see what other states are doing to sort of to jockey ahead of us? I think somebody mentioned it in a lot of different ways, whether that's workforce, regulatory, but people are wanting to know how do we fit in the regional play?
Yeah, well, there is definitely a regional play, and it extends all the way from Montana all the way through to Arizona. And the Mountain West has a fairly an abundant stretch of resources, the raw resources essentially, everything from uranium through other mining bodies, right? So, and there's certainly a degree of effort in just about every state in between that is trying to pursue the critical minerals opportunity in some way. But I think Wyoming is, I have no hesitation at all saying that Wyoming is ahead of everybody else in terms of nuclear energy, and they're doing pretty darn well with respect to critical minerals in a relative context to the neighboring states. It has a good asset base, certainly. There's also distinct in terms of having good companies like RER and GISA working actively to develop technologies in the state. That's not much more than a pipe dream in some other states at this point. Really, really strong institutions. I think that sets the state apart. Maybe I'm a little bit biased about the Wyoming Energy Authority, but There's not many other energy authorities, business councils, and schools of energy resources in other states. They don't really compare, and that is very much a big advantage. I think speed, in some cases, it's speed in Wyoming is better than other states, and maturity of thought is the other one. The other very close neighboring states are very vocal about their efforts, but they have a lot of work to do. And Wyoming is well positioned. So I think I can't remember your earlier question about the relative positions of state, but you reference that Josh is Wyoming positioned well to leapfrog. Yeah, I think that's how I'd classify it. It's got a lot of work to do, sure, as Ken mentioned in terms of workforce and agglomeration, but everything is we have a lot of advantages that make that the state is poised for a bit of ambition to manifest as progress really quickly. If things come together in the right way, the state could make some big advances. But yeah, every critical minerals is topic du jour because of the urgency that is pushed on the state by different things, right? The nation by other things, and so there's a lot of activity. But Wyoming's doing pretty darn well at the moment.
I want to touch on that idea of leapfrogging. It sounds like we do have some competitive advantages, and we're lacking in some areas. What does that mean from is it a regulatory? Do we need to put in a regulatory framework or like a policy framework at the legislative level? Do we need to make more investments? What would you all say that would help us leapfrog those other states?
And maybe I'll lead off because I know what other states are doing. Generally, the approach of other states is to, and Tyler would have thoughts on this one too. They are pursuing, building another office building sort of lab with a small request from the legislature to fund another department at the university to build a critical minerals lab. Right, that is happening all over the place, and that's great to see that ambition and thought, but really it's not going to move the dial, right? It's not going to move things. It's not going to really change the United States position and everything. It's things that Ken's doing, building real facilities, sub commercial test facilities. That moves the dial. And when we supported that build out a couple of years ago, it was because of the scale of that effort. That's why we wanted to do it. So it's projects like that, and projects like what Grace is working on with that technology advancement. So I think it's not necessarily regulatory. We already have a great competitive advantage there. It's investment and realizing that building sub-commercial demonstration and test facilities is kind of the niche area that the rest of the region and perhaps the country doesn't really have it at a position anywhere in that. So that's the piece that I think Wyoming should dive into. Going for the workforce opportunity, that's hard to do when we don't have an agglomeration and we have the Salt Lake City and Denver metropolitans just right next door. That's not worth going into and let them do that. And I think we should take advantage of the expansive areas that we have close to resource base with very good institutions and pretty good in places stranded infrastructure, and do things like what Ken's doing.
Yeah,
Sarah, I know you've got a thought or two on that, and then
yeah, I
we'll jump
can.
to another one. Yep.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too a little bit. Like many of the other panelists have mentioned, there's sort of this gap between early research and getting to market, like really market. And it's sort of between that, like technical readiness 5 and maybe a little bit beyond that. There's kind of a gap there. And like Glenn mentioned, I think other states are focusing a little bit more on that earlier development piece. We've got, we've been building out an ecosystem to make Wyoming a really good place to commercialize products in any vertical. But I think where our opportunity could really lie, because we do need to get over that big workforce hurdle in order to build a cluster at the scale that can break that big chicken and egg cycle. I think where our opportunity lies is really focusing on those sort of like middle technology readiness technologies and really kind of putting the people in that gap that can help those technologies get from lab to market that really needs people in that gap. And so that can solve the technical problems to help those products get from early to late stage, and it solves the workforce problem too. So that I think really is our opportunity in Wyoming, is to fill that people gap, and capture that niche, before other states do, while we're at this kind of like emerging opportunity state. I saw Grayson came off
Yeah, and
mute.
I was just gonna say, no, that's and in startup world we call that gap the valley of death, and that's where it's super tough to get from a pilot to commercialization, and only 0.1% of companies actually get venture funded. So that means 99.9% of those other companies are just failing. And so if you all like if the state can take that leadership and help bridge that valley of death, it really leads to that commercialization and mitigates that risk. So yeah, I think that's spot on, Sarah.
Yeah, I might jump in there because that specific question came up in from our audience about how do we make sure that companies can bridge that valley of death. And the valley of death is a gift and a curse, right? We realize that some companies shouldn't make it through that. So you can't support everybody. But I think that working with companies, sending that signal, providing enough capital to help the ones that are going to make it through that and should make it through that, I think that's where some of these opportunities lie for the state with our wealth, with our know-how to help people through that. So I think there's a really good opportunity there. I want to ask one more question because we have, again, people are sticking around, which is pretty awesome. But I want to ask a question about small businesses that you might work with today, and what maybe is missing, how can our small businesses that might be working, could be working in this industry, how can they be better prepared? How can they engage more? How can they take advantage of this as well? I'm thinking of, whether it be construction companies or dirt contractors or, anybody that's working with you and alongside you, how do we best prepare them to partner?
I, I'll comment on that a little bit. Look, that's an excellent question, and I would say be conscientious, be proud of what you do, take ownership of what you do, understand what a schedule is, and understand what a budget is. Those are the things. Be reliable. Those are the things that and be willing to learn. I would say. I mean, it's you're not likely going to step into the exact job you had before, or it's not going to be exactly the same work you had before. So be willing to take direction, be willing to listen, ask questions, and have pride in your work and understand a budget and a schedule.
Anyone want to add? I remember I worked at a place where it was like scope, schedule, budget. Just it was like over and over. It was a super important thing. And I think it's super important. So anybody else want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think Wyoming is already very well positioned for these types of projects. We have the manufacturing capabilities, the fabrication capabilities. I'd like us to maybe lean into a little bit more on sensors and, information technologies. I think, that's a lot where we could benefit from, some other small businesses supporting that. I think in terms of just like building hardware and kit, like we've got a great, base already in Wyoming, that's been supporting other industries. So.
I'll add one point to that, Grayson, and I would say that this might be a role where the university could help out some of the larger, more established businesses in the state. We have a broad-ranging stakeholder network from working on small-scale projects in many different domains. So if there is a need that a larger company, established company has, and you don't want to spend all of the time surveying. And that's a route that not only the Business Council, but also the University of Wyoming on the technical side of things, we might be able to make some of those connections that we know about in those spheres that you are looking for.
Yeah, hey, there was a question in there as well about infrastructure and housing and some of those after effects that I think sometimes we forget about. In fact, I remember one time I was talking to a legislative committee and they asked me what I thought about housing and whether that was a problem or not. And I said, "Well, actually, I think my job is to make the housing problem worse." And I've since eaten those words and worked really hard to work on housing because it is an important piece. But I think more than anything, rather than posing it to this group, I think what we probably ought to do is really think about how all these things work together. And that just so happens that we will be talking about that later in, well, I guess early in next year after the holidays. But I want to thank all of you for being part of this, and then maybe zoom out just for a little bit and conclude here. We I think we did a lot to reinforce some core themes that are worth carrying forward. One is that, just getting the rocks out of the ground isn't enough. Our opportunity lies in the processing, the technology, innovation, and the people who kind of like really make it work. And second, that we have some real advantages that our competitors don't. I think we mentioned our regulatory environment is a big time competitive advantage. We also have a workforce and energy expertise and heavy industrial expertise that's going to be important, plus the research capacity and I think our culture of all of us sitting down together to try to figure this out is really important too. But I think I want people to leave this with realizing that this is a generational opportunity. It's not something that's short term. It's not something that we'll look at and go, golly, that was silly. We should have never run after that. The decisions we're making now about things like the infrastructure, the partnerships, the talent, and the investment that we need to make to put Wyoming in its rightful place as the epicenter of critical minerals. It's super important, it's super urgent, and it's going to impact us for decades to come if we take advantage of it. And I want to thank everybody for joining. A lot of folks, I mean, over 150 people came in, more than that registered. That means they'll probably watch it later. And if you don't mind, as you leave, take that short survey about the webinar. It just helps us make it better. It helps answer questions and it helps us connect with you so that we can talk more about the things that are coming up and more important. I want to make sure that everybody that came today knows about the next webinar on building Wyoming's future, which is Wednesday, January 28th. And we're going to be focusing on infrastructure, not just like roads and bridges, but beyond that, and talking a lot about the infrastructure our communities need to grow and to take advantage of the opportunities that we've mentioned in this webinar and the one before. If you think about it, we're in a really awesome spot. We are in a place that I think a lot of states could envy, but that is going to pass us by if we don't take advantage of it. So understanding the challenges that we have ahead of us will help leaders like all of us really, pose the solutions and get those enacted. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your insights and experience, and thanks for everybody for joining today. This type of stuff matters. This matters to our future. The signals that we send today are going to ripple out there for a long time. And I think Grayson nailed it when he said the signals that we send right now are not just for us. They're for everybody in the United States. They're maybe for people around the world watching and understanding how Wyoming is a leader and can continue to be a leader. But those signals point both ways. And if we don't signal strength and we don't signal investment in ourselves, then people will go other places. Money will flow other places and opportunity will go other places. And so I think it's really important for us to continue to keep that whole abundant attitude that was displayed here today about the opportunity that's ahead of us and signal that strength that Wyoming has. So thank you all for helping shape Wyoming's future and be part of this today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.